My name is Kristin Clarke with Authorlink, and I'm pleased to be interviewing award-winning journalist Maggie Jackson, whom you may recognize as the writer of the acclaimed nonfiction book Distracted. Her most recent book, however, is titled Uncertain: The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure. And we're going to delve first into Maggie's book development and writing process, and then a bit into the book's thought-provoking content. So welcome, Maggie, and let's start right off at the beginning. What is your process for choosing a book topic and then deciding on your main messages?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. And it's not a straightforward process, and it's not a short process. I tend to think about a topic. It sort of burbles up, it percolates in the back of my mind as I'm doing other things or marketing, promoting, speaking about the most recent book. I'll just sort of think about what topics offhandedly, so to speak, for about a year. But then something does come to the forefront that I feel is an interesting add-on. So I actually see the three books that I've written as a trilogy, all topics related to, aspects of humanity that are understudied, often maligned. The first book was about the nature of home in the digital age. The second was called Distracted, and it was about the erosion of attention in society. But of course, very few people could even, define attention. And then thirdly, uncertainty, which is, of course, a very messy topic. So in terms of uncertainty, I also particularly backed into this book because I started writing a book about thinking in the digital age, and the first chapter was about uncertainty. And then it wouldn't let me go as a topic, and I realized there was phenomenal science just being done at this moment, so it became the book.
And has that approach to your book development changed over the years as you've written each of these?
I guess I've become more aware of the difference between journalism and book writing. So that's a difficult thing, I think, for journalists. In some ways, we all want, as journalists, to make a book an extended story, an extended article. And I think that doesn't work. On one hand, we have the urgency and the aliveness of field reporting as a journalist typically. But at the other hand, I think what I've learned over the years is to go deeper and deeper, not just in the research, but with people. So I started out with Associated Press. I was a Boston Globe columnist. I mean, I was not a long form writer. And so I've just learned how to deepen and strengthen my process in both the research, in this, research, as in library research, deep reading, interviews of researchers and scientists, and then also with my interviews, and finally the field work that I do. I literally now embed myself in people's lives for days at a time and have, sometimes, multiple interviews, each of which can last hours. So those are people that are really kind of the heroes of my book who allow me to do that.
And how long did it take you to research this book? Because there is a tremendous amount of research in here, as well as stories.
Yes, it's a little bit hard to completely quantify because at the early stage, typically with my books, actually, I'm working another gig or something, part-time in a think tank, or I was writing a column for the Boston Globe and, for some book in the past. So I'll work part-time on it, and then I'll go full-time in the last couple of years. I also took a little bit of time. It's not that I broke writing, but, I had some life experiences that demanded far more of my time for this book. So it took a little bit more time than usual. It's really hard to put an exact number on it.
And the entire book first, or did you complete all of your research first and then kind of figure out how you were going to parse it?
I do quite a bit of research first in order to frame the book, in order to write the book proposal, in order to outline the chapters. But all of that can change radically depending on the chapter. I mean, some chapters that I outlined and did research for turn into really almost a completely different chapter by the time I get to them. And so that's part of the process. That's part of remaining flexible and open to the nuances and to what I'm learning as a writer. So in this case, I didn't, for the previous book, Distracted, I did a tremendous amount of research and then wrote each chapter, based on the field reporting. So I did the research, then I did field reporting, and then wrote it all kind of in that kind of chunk. For this one, I was doing more of all of the above all at once. So each chapter, I was doing research, interviews, and then visits out into the field at the same time. And then, of course, then I bring it all together and devote a certain amount of focused time to write. It will take me 4 to 6 weeks, maybe more, just to write a chapter.
I was interested in how you use other people while you are writing, doing the writing part. Do you share your drafts with people for feedback, or are you mostly sharing your ideas and thoughts, and then kind of using that as you shape?
Well, it's mostly me, but it's a little of the former. I don't belong to writing groups. I don't share typically with other authors. In the proposal stage, I shared and was edited by my agents. At one point, for a brief time, I was working with an outside editor before I got the publisher, because this book was so difficult to frame. The recent one, Uncertain. But for the most part, when I'm involved, the sharing I do is more typically with, the feedback I get is more typically with the experts, the scientists, the artists, whoever I'm interviewing becomes a form of feedback, because if my questions don't fly or elicit the most deep answers, I then have to go further in terms of questioning someone. So I'm really in some ways getting more feedback. But as far as the writing concerned, my husband, who's a journalist as well, reads everything. Mostly more to cheer me on than to edit me critically. And then there are a few people, but it's not really widely shared before it gets to the editor. And I didn't give this or the past book, maybe even the first book, to the editor until it was done. At least that, the final draft.
Did you even decide when it was like, okay, I'm going to just keep researching, and at some point I have to cut this off and actually start writing? How do you reach that point then? Is it more because you're on a deadline, or is it more you just have a sense that you have come full circle and are now ready to sort it all through and get it down?
Both. I am always aware of the deadline. I remember once being called up for jury duty in New York City, and it was grand jury or something, twice a week for a year, and literally sobbing at the judge's bench, and because the prosecutor wanted me to be on the jury. I did get off, but the book deadline is always at the top of my mind. But within that rubric or framework, I do have a sense when there's a story to be told. I mean, you could go on forever telling various stories, but I start out with questions. What does it mean? How can creativity play a role how can uncertainty play a role in creativity? And what is a daydream? The what if question of the daydream is a very uncertain process. So why is that useful when we denigrate it in our society? I'll start off with a question like that. And then I do get a sense that I have my answer. It might not be the perfect answer. There might be other people would have different answers, but I get a sense of that. Particularly what I'm looking for is the latest, the most cutting edge understanding of a question. What does it mean to be thinking well in a crisis, and how does uncertainty fit in there? What does it mean to be open-minded to a political opponent, and uncertainty certainly plays a role there. So I basically will understand. I try to understand what the lay of the land, what experts are really thinking about, and then I know where the edge of knowledge stands generally, and that's where I want to go. That kind of homework so to speak, allows me to understand what's new, what's coming up, what's the forefront of that particular neuroscience or anthropology, et cetera. It takes a lot of legwork, but then I know what's going to be timely moving into the future because I'm trying to write tomorrow's book, not today's book or yesterday's book.
Did you find there was a particular chapter that was especially challenging to write?
Yes, the chapter where I was having a medical issue, a health issue, was really very hard to write. There were all sorts of complications. I had like early cancer, so it was really hard to write that chapter. It actually came out pretty well. I was, somehow in the angst and suffering, I was able to draw on something, and but it took longer. There was a chapter on how we can be aware of the world. And I think that technology and the way we live today, the hurried society, makes us so checked out in some ways of what's going on around us, even the people who are there. I really wanted to embrace that or unfold that within a book on uncertainty, because when you're perceptive about what's going on in life, well, then you are aware of how unpredictable life really is and how dynamic and how changeable. It's really important to be aware of that. And that chapter was really difficult because, and it became what I had least expected. And I found out that uncertainty is really a kind of good stress that puts us on our toes. The unease of uncertainty is a good stress response that literally opens our eyes and makes us more receptive to new data. It took a lot of time to get to that discovery, basically. Not every chapter was pretty difficult, but yes, some were much, much more difficult than others. And I always have to remind myself, I've written 3 books. Many people have written many more, but I've learned over time that the second chapter seems to be the most difficult. Somehow I've gotten started. The novelty, it's not that the novelty is worn off, but somehow I don't have enough under my belt to feel as though it's a downhill slope toward finishing. I'm daunted and confused by the topic, which is a good thing. It's all about the wisdom of uncertainty. But I find that the second chapter usually takes a second complete try. I find myself wandering off into the wilderness. I don't know. I'd love to find someone who can tell me exactly why, but those are my theories.
That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the book content itself. I love this book. I think it is a real game changer for leaders in particular whose decisions are constantly being told, you need to make them more efficiently, and yet efficiently seems to mean faster. And yet your book is really showing how uncertainty can pay off big by slowing this process down. And I love I want to make sure I get this right here about so that leaders can truly test what they think they know and modulate themselves for so-called creeping intuition bias based on their long-term experience, their habits, and frankly, their ego. So what prompted you specifically to say, okay, uncertainty is the topic I'm going to really dig deep in and create a whole book around?
Well, again, it was going back to the idea of thinking in the digital age. So after Distracted, I wondered, since attention is a vehicle, I wondered, well, what does a moment's focus gain you? And what kinds of focus are both uplifted or bolstered by our digital speed-driven lives, and what are we losing? And in particular, I wanted to understand, what are we losing? And of course, it came to, sort of almost common sense that we might be losing the slower types of thinking. So when I thought at that point that uncertainty as a state of mind was really a preface to good thinking, that I wrote the first chapter of this book on thinking, sort of assuming that uncertainty was something to eradicate, and then you'd get into the skill of good thinking. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. Uncertainty is both a preface and an instigator. That unease, puts you on your toes. It's really nature's signal, our natural evolutionary signal, that the time has come to stop the routine and the familiar and the obvious, as we live our lives on autopilot, and then swivel and pivot into intentional, deliberative thought. It is the gateway to creativity and curiosity, etc. And what's exciting is that the science is really there to prove that uncertainty really actually bolsters that kind of thinking. So that's how it was very difficult to get to that topic, simply because uncertainty is very often treated as, well, there are basically two kinds of uncertainty. One is the uncertainty, the unknown, that's aleatory. That's kind of what you can't know, like whether the stock market will rise or fall. And then there's our called epistemic uncertainty. Our neural response to the unknown is largely uncertainty. And that's where that's where there hasn't been a lot of, popular books. We hear about woo, let's embrace uncertainty, but there's no science there. And then there's also a lot of probabilistic reasoning and, models, and let's profit from risk analysis, etc. That's not the book I wanted to write. I knew that there was a whole space in which, people didn't quite understand uncertainty, a psychological uncertainty. And that's where I put, then I realized that there was a huge frontier and a lot of new research. And it was such an exciting place to be when I finally, focused on uncertainty. And I had some, I had some pointers, one editor said, I think you're writing about uncertainty, because, I drafted a few chapters. Then I went and gave a talk on the early book, and someone in the audience kept saying, well, you should really study uncertainty. And, it just, he was kind of there. I got a lot of pointers that little did I know that that's really where the book was headed. And so I'm grateful for that kind of feedback.
You introduce some terminology in this book as well. One that I liked was around the adaptive expert and its relationship to uncertainty. You want to talk a little bit about that? It kind of reminds me of the call for embracing a beginner's mind.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it's different too.
Exactly. It has that echo or that connection to the beginner's mind. Well, basically, there's been a tremendous advancement in studies of experts. And now it's known that, well, first of all, we accrue expertise, the surgeon or the accountant, through practice and experience. And it's not just talent, it's not just practice, it's both. But at the same time, as we accrue this knowledge, we are gaining heuristic shortcut thinking. In other words, the doctor hears chest pains and thinks heart attack. That's a heuristic that they can use to act quickly in a environment that they've learned, a situation that they've already learned. But experts tend to grow kind of complacent. We all do, and we fall back on these old mental models and heuristic shortcuts, even in a new complex situation. So routine experts are very impressive in benign or predictable environments. We've known that in every single field this is true. There are studies that actually show that senior accountants are worse at picking up embezzlement and other anomalies in the books than undergraduate accounting students. I mean, it's just, we lose the ability to remove ourselves from that creeping intuition bias. But adaptive experts are actually the ones who spend more time deliberating or diagnosing a new problem than even novices do. And what they do is not only look at multiple options, they ask themselves, what's going on? And in order to do that, you need to be uncertain. As one organizational management guru says, their resting state is not certainty. They're constantly living at the edge of what they know. And they're also the ones who take on harder and harder cases. So they expand their knowledge. And so I talk about adaptive expertise as breaking the inertia of your know-how. There comes a time when you need to not fall back on old solutions. You need to start thinking and contemplating and really wading into a problem. And that's what adaptive expertise is. To research that, I went up to Toronto and actually spent time in operating rooms with top surgeons. One day, one of the surgeons who kind of was being a routine expert thought he'd made a grave error in this very, very complicated surgery because he just was speeding into it as if it was all routine. He was wearing his certainty like a badge of honor. And he's emblematic. I mean, he's a fantastic surgeon, but he's emblematic of how we all, often operate today, especially in a world of instant answers and clickable, downloadable thinking and, et cetera.
I was fascinated by your final chapter on artificial intelligence and the compelling case you make about why AI developers should build uncertainty tools in order to reduce potentially catastrophic risks and results. You got to play with some of this emerging technology. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about why uncertainty in AI might actually save the world.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yes, I got to beta test what I'm calling the I don't know robot. And in a nutshell, traditional AI is built upon a very narrow definition of intelligence. So what does it mean to be smart according to longtime rationalist thinkers? It's you just pursue your goals, you achieve your aims. That's all it is. So that's why AI has been set up and designed to basically be given a goal and then learn on its own through the wonder of neural networks how to gain that goal. The Amazon robot can stack the packages in the warehouse, and your future housekeeper robot can vacuum your home. But because of this, it's has very little ability to utilize or recognize uncertainty, only a little bit in the environment in order to actually be effective in the wild. What now some of AI's top leaders are urgently trying to do is to build models and robots to, find a new antibiotic or to work in manufacturing or to help, people in wheelchairs that are actually able to be unsure of their aims. Well, you sort of ask, why would you want that? Actually, if the robot is unsure of its aim, well, where do you want me to buy a cup of coffee? I'm not pre-programmed to just go and buy the coffee that's the most expensive, but it's closer. Becomes more teachable. It also becomes more honest. It's not just following one reward-driven path to an answer without any human intervention or help. It's actually able to be interrupted, and it's able to learn on the fly, and it's able to be more human. In fact, user studies show that this kind of I don't know robot is seen as more intelligent and is actually a better performer with humans. So it's also called human compatible AI. And what's really wonderful, not only might this actually help AI become stoppable, which is and so therefore more safe to use. But also it occurred to me that an unsure robot or model, because technology is so influential to us, we are being shaped by using technology that's narrow, instant, clickable, in which there's very little room for the gray spaces and the wisdom of being in gray spaces. If a robot can be unsure, maybe we will be potentially, influenced for the better by working with a machine actually kind of holds up this mirror to our better selves, and maybe we too can learn to ask questions and slow down and use the first thought that comes to mind as a data point, etc. So I think this could be a huge leap forward, not only for AI but also for humanity. And it's a niche movement, but it's coming up strong. And dozens of laboratories are building these new systems all over the world. So I was really excited by this potential.
There's some problem with your bandwidth a little bit, so there's a little drag, but hopefully it will come back on here. My last question was around the chapter called Outside the Walls of Our Perspective, which really should be required reading for anyone who is interested in reducing the extremism in America today. I wish I could interview you on this whole chapter alone, because there's a lot to unpack here and some very riveting research. But instead, I will urge our viewers to read it and reflect on it. I think you'll find it incredibly interesting. So I'm going to toss to you for just a short response around sharing the key conclusions that you found to be most compelling as you were exploring uncertainty and the role in building greater long-lasting tolerance, even among the most vehement extremists.
Yes, it is a complicated topic, but because we humans categorize so well, and we need to know whether that fruit in a tree is delicious or poison. We categorize each other. Are they in group or out group? And we do so quickly. Our brains, in essence, innately categorize the out group member, someone who's different from us, as not worthy of our attention due to complicated neural reasons. And that leads to stereotyping and dehumanization and et cetera. There are many ways in which countering stereotypes and prejudices being there are many methods that are being tried right now, but one of the most promising is something called perspective taking, which is literally just thinking, what is it like to see the world through another person's eyes, particularly an out-group member, a convicted felon or someone from a different race or someone from a different sports team. This is very powerfully effective in that people who perspective take about someone else actually are more willing to sit with them, to engage with them, to work with them. I mean, it begins to, spur that kind of contact that also then, is a virtuous cycle and leads to less prejudice. So I went canvassing in Los Angeles with LGBTQ activists who are using this perspective taking as the core of a way to talk to opponent voters and lower their bias against LGBTQ people. I also went back in history and found that, there an amazing story about a civil rights activist who became friends with a KKK leader in Durham in 1973. She used perspective taking and her heroics. She actually protected him from a possible violent encounter. She really, her work has really been rippling through the years. And what's important is that perspective taking is an act of deliberate uncertainty. You literally are jolting your way away from the assumptions and from the autopilot of your stereotypes. Because if you say, what is it like to see the world through their eyes? You don't know the answer. Even if I'm talking about my twin, I don't know what her perspective is. But by doing so, it's a leap of imagination. And what you're doing is taking on a mindset of perplexity, which is exactly what Socrates asked people in Athens, democratic Athens, so long to do. He said, teach each other and listen to one another, and do so, amidst a sort of self-induced perplexity. That's it. That's what we might call open-mindedness. So that's really important, and I think that's something that any of us can do at any moment. Across the team, across the kitchen table, across the hedgerow, our neighbor, whose politics we can't stand. Take a minute, pause, and think, what is the world like through their eyes? And you'll open up a space of, hopefully mutual learning, not to convert them necessarily, or maybe you will, but just to learn from, because all humans have something true to say. As Aristotle said, all humans have something true to say about the nature of things. Not everyone is completely wrong all the time.
Thank you so much, Maggie. We could talk all day, I'm sure, but I really appreciate this addition to the business literature and to psychological literature, because it is very thought-provoking, and I much enjoyed it. So thank you for joining us today, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and I really appreciate the conversation.